Lovely to see everyone again, and welcome to Ask Steve Judd. I'm Sue Brayne, and today we're going to be talking about transits and I think radio waves. Is that right, Steve?
Yes, in a kind of unusual way.
Exactly. So let's get down to it then. Let's start with transits and what they are and how they constantly play out in our lives, both personally and also collectively.
There are many different systems of forecasting. I personally abhor the word prediction. And although a better word for forecasting is, you'll like this one, prognostication.
Prognostic, very
right.
A bit of prognostication.
Indeed, it almost sounds obscene. There are a number of different methods of forecasting, but the two most commonly used in day-by-day astrology, you can use solar returns, lunar returns, eclipses, but the main two systems of forecasting used by practicing astrologers are secondary progressions and transits. And the fundamental difference between them in one sentence is that progressions deal with the growth of the soul from within, and transits deal with external events and environments.
It's kind of like progressions are like your inner weather, aren't they? It's like what you're feeling about things.
Yes, very much so. So when people say to me, well, you're telling me that lumps of rock up in space affect us, and I go, yeah. And they go, okay, prove it. And I go, okay. And so it's a short step from demonstrating how the moon works on the tides and how you can hear Jupiter on a shortwave radio. It's a short step from there to say, well, if those radio waves from Jupiter are hitting the Earth, then they're having an effect on the Earth. Therefore, they're having an effect on every living being on the Earth. Now, because Jupiter's constantly changing position, those radio waves are going to be coming from different areas of the sky at every different moment in time. Therefore, the influence of them is going to be subtly different at every given time. This is how transits work. If I were to be a bit more vague and esoteric, I would say that transits work through the laws of cause and effect as circumstances and events in our lives. If I were to be nailed down by a bunch of scientists and astronomers and say, right, mathematics, prove how transits work, I would say, well, according to your criteria, I can't, but I have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of statistics and client verifications that say they do.
And they do.
Oh, they do.
They do. I had to
just ask anyone about their ask anyone about their Saturn return, for example.
Yeah, but Uranus sitting on her ascendant, and an entire life it's just completely, almost blowing up.
Yeah.
That's what, and it was in that moment, and she's so grateful to understand why all these sudden things were happening to her.
And it is strange how in certain planetary movements tends to work much more precisely than others. And what's stranger is that isn't the case with everyone. For example, with myself, I feel the transits of Mercury and Mars, Saturn and Uranus. I do not feel the transits of Venus, and marginally do I feel the transits of Jupiter. Whereas other people, it's completely the reverse. They don't feel Mars at all, but they really feel Venus and Jupiter. And I suggest...
Is that because, do you think, if, for instance, I've got Sagittarius rising, and that makes Jupiter my ruling planet, and I am sensitive to Jupiter, and I wonder if it's more relevant when it is either it's your ruling planet or one of those planets are sitting on the ascendant, descendant, or the MC,
on an angle, or in a very strong aspect.
Yes.
Chart.
Yes.
Jupiter is unaspected in my chart. I don't feel Jupiter.
Yeah.
Venus is not a major role player in my chart. I don't feel Venus. But Mars, Mercury, and Saturn are big players in my chart, so I do feel them.
Yeah.
Of course, that's just my experience from my chart, but I've seen it with so many others that if a planet is weak in a chart, you don't really resonate to the influences of that planet. Whereas
Well,
if it's
makes
strong,
sense, wouldn't it? Because that's not your journey. It's not what you're here for. You're here for something else.
Exactly. And also the influences of the transit can vary from person to person, depending on their own state of evolution and consciousness. You know, if someone comes up and they say, "Oh, I've got Pluto on my moon for the next 2 years," well, after I've stopped, after I've
Gone, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, at the very least, yes. Some of those people with Pluto on their moon for 2 years will grab it by the horns and go, okay, I'm going to get into my own caves at the bottom of my soul. I'm going to study psychology. I'm going to go into the unconscious and the shamanic. And others will go to a doctor and get antidepressants and end up on a psychiatrist's couch or at the bottom of the bottle. But the effects of the transit will still happen. The way you choose to deal with them is up to you.
I think it's really important for us all to understand that each planet has a higher aspect and a lower aspect. And it's when we work through the lower aspect to understand the higher aspect or attune to it, that's when these transits really, really rock and lead us to what I call the soul's path, the soul's journey, that take us to our higher calling, if you like.
Exactly. For example, Uranus, the change bringer, it can produce sudden shocks which can traumatize you and force your life to change in an instant. But it can equally, at exactly the same time, stimulate, innovate, revolutionize, and accelerate one's personal evolution.
It's
but one has to be willing to,
isn't it?
yes, one has to be willing to recognize the influence and to flow with it, as opposed to going, I'm not going to change.
Well, you don't have an option with Uranus, do you? Really, it's like,
So with certain transits, you do not have an option. Things are going to happen. It's just a question of whether you do it willingly or kicking and screaming. So yes.
Yeah, and I would say to everyone, if Uranus is doing anything in your chart, take notice, because it can bring accidents as well to wake you up. So, you know, or just stuff that comes out a left ball that you're not expecting. So just attune to it.
I have very direct personal experience of this in my personal life over this last year, beyond which I will not go any further.
Yeah.
But yes, Uranus can be a massive change bringer, and in certain extreme cases, it can be almost fatal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it sort of wakens you up to your mortality. It's that shock.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where Pluto doesn't so much. It's more about the psychology, isn't it? I would say.
Oh, yeah.
Going in deep. And then Saturn, of course, trots along, and oh, it's lesson time.
Again, I've developed this reputation over this last few years as Saturn's boy, because I always say to my clients, I love Saturn, and they look at me and go, because most people don't like Saturn because they see Saturn as the teacher and the authority and the one that brings boundaries and structures and discipline. To which I would say yes, but you could easily turn that 180 degrees around and say, but if you were to behave in a way that exemplified boundaries, discipline, and hard work, then Saturn would flow with you and you would get lots of lovely opportunities. So again, every planet has its positive and its challenging side.
I mean, poor old Saturn's got a really bad rap, hasn't it, in the astrological community? Oh, Saturn's on your what's it or whatever. And I'm like you, because of being an Aquarian, I'm ruled by Saturn. I find it's really helped me grow up and mature and become an elder. Actually, I just feel like now I'm stepping into my Saturn years, and I'm so grateful for Saturn accompanying me.
There is a strong school of thought that says that Saturn does get a lot more easy to work with post 37, 38 than when younger. Yes. But I suggest that Saturn's reputation has, I think we can blame the early Greeks and the early Romans for this one, because, you know, if we get Greek mythology, which gives us Western astrology much of its archetypes, is full of mothers abandoning their daughters and sons castrating their fathers. And of course, Saturn castrated his father, Uranus.
Uranus.
So
they weren't very nice to each other in those
no, it's not a lot of love lost there, you know.
yeah.
But then it's myth.
Mm.
And myth can be translated in many different ways. So, but I find it fascinating how some planets, especially the fast moving ones like Mercury and Mars, and the full moon, of course, can have very specific, not so much specific events, but the timing can be very accurate. Whereas the outer planets like Neptune and Pluto, their influences can be taken out over a year or sometimes even two, but Uranus can work to the day. I know this to be true. So that's one of the paradoxes here. Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Pluto could take weeks, months, or even years to manifest their influence. Uranus can manifest in a single day. But then Uranus is different to every other planet. Its poles are on the equator.
Yeah, it's on its side, isn't it?
Yeah, it spins like that instead of all like that, like all the other planets do. Quite a few of its moons go retrograde, which is kind of no other planet has moons that do that. And yeah, it's just everything about Uranus is different. It's the maverick. It's the rebel.
So I just wanted to talk to you just to split this up, and anybody who has never sort of really looked at transits before, into the personal transits, the personal planets, the social planets, and the transpersonal planets. So let's just start with the personal ones. Just explain how they work, because they're really quick moving.
I can only give you what I've learned through my experience of observing my clients and my own experiences over the decades. The inner planets, the planets that you can see with the naked eye that move quite fast, as in, I call them planets, but it's a generic term, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars. Mars has a pretty strong reputation in transit. It always works.
We call it a trigger, don't we?
I've never seen anyone go through, for example, Mars conjunct their moon without going through a 24 to 72 hour period of feeling emotionally more potentially irritable, scratchy, itchy, volatile, frustrated, impatient. Although in exactly the same breath, that same energy can be used in really big physical labor, like digging the garden, walking the dog, down the gym, which is a much more positive way of using that energy than getting emotionally upset. But Mars transits will bring physical energy, and particularly Mars's journey through the houses in the horoscope for an average of 6 to 7 weeks at a time can really enliven that house in your chart. Whenever I see Mars pass on someone's midheaven and move into their 10th house of career, I will say to them, look, over the coming 6 or 7 weeks, best time of the year for marketing and promoting and pushing yourself out into the world, you're going to get a 5% extra boost free of charge. Mercury is an even more acute timer because Mercury normally moves very quickly indeed, except when it's retrograde. So Mercury is often a main... I often look for Mercury transits in conjunction with other planets for things like signatures, contracts, negotiations, agreements.
Travel.
Indeed.
market, it's sort of, it's the market trader. That's how I look at
Yeah, yeah,
So,
okay. And he connects everything because he's a fast-wing messenger of the gods. Yeah. I experience Venus by transit as working strongest when it's retrograde.
yes, I get that.
And a number of other people have reported the same thing.
Interesting.
That Venus by transit can be a little bit opulent, laissez-faire, easygoing, so much so that you hardly notice it. But when it's retrograde, there's some deep internal lessons around, well, what's really important, what's got value here.
My heart, the heart is
Yeah.
the heart.
The sun by transit, if the sun's on its own and there's no other aspects to the planet and the sun just passes over it, you may not even notice it. But the sun is a trigger. If, for example, if you have Jupiter on your moon and then the sun passes over your moon at the same time, that's going to narrow that Jupiter transit down to 2 or 3 days as opposed to 2 or 3 months.
Yes, yes.
And of course, the full moon and new moon do have a strong effect. It has to be tight. When I see someone say, "Oh, there's a partial lunar eclipse coming up, and it's 5 degrees away from sextiling my Pluto," and I think, well, that's not anything.
It needs to be bang on, doesn't it? Really,
It needs to be less than 1 degree.
Yeah, less than 1 degree. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Okay.
eclipses.
Sorry.
Eclipses.
Oh.
Transits of the sun and the moon when they come together or opposite each other. Those effects can last 6 months or be delayed 6 months in some cases.
Yeah. Yeah, they're kind of like a trigger again. And it's interesting how things play out. I think it's so important for people to understand that transits are often a process, not an event. There's a tail on them. It's important, and there will be an aftermath or something manifesting or.
Yes. I often find that transits, as they approach, there's a sense of, okay, something's brewing, something's happening. It's a fertilization. I need to pay attention to this. And then there's the actual moment of the transit, which can be an event or a situation unfolding. And then there's the aftermath where you can look at it and you think, okay, well, what did I learn from that?
Yeah.
Or sometimes you're in a state of recovery. And of course, the length of the run up and the aftermath depends on the speed of the planet and how fast it clears the aspects to your chart.
Okay, let's look at what we call the social planets, kind of the bridge between the personal planets and the transpersonal planets. That's Jupiter and Saturn. So we've talked a little bit about them. Is there anything that you would like to say for them as social planets, as these bridges?
I can only give you in my experience with Jupiter, because I'm not really Jupiter's not my favorite energy. I experience, and most of the people I deal with don't really experience Jupiter that strongly, but by sextile, trine, or even square, and sometimes not even opposition. Conjunctions, yes, obviously, but perhaps even more so, Jupiter has an almost exact 12-year orbit, 11.98, something like that years. So it spends, on average, a year at a time in each house of your zodiac. And that is a big indicator. For example, Jupiter is now moving into my 9th house later this year, and I've got more travel planned over the next year than at any time in the last decade. When Jupiter moves into your 10th house of career, that's the time where you just ram your foot on the accelerator.
It expands things. That's what Jupiter does. It's the benevolent expander. So normally it brings good stuff. And also we can overdo it, can't we, Steve?
Oh, big time. Remember, Jupiter has no surface. You can't land on it. It is just hot air. And it does give out 3 times as much light and heat as it takes in from the sun.
Yeah.
Promises lots.
Yeah. Yeah. But just know that if it's going, whatever it's going through your chart, it will expand that house. So let's go. And we've talked a little bit about Saturn. Is there anything else you'd like to say about Saturn?
Yeah, one thing. Saturn in his guise as Chronos from the Greek, gives us chronometer, timepiece, and Saturn's reputation as Old Father Time is well known. The skeleton with the cowl and the scythe. But Saturn also gives us cycles in life, the 7-year itch, the 7-year cycle, or 7.25-year cycle to be precise, and a 29-year cycle. Every 7 years, 7.25 years, Saturn will be square, conjunct, or opposite its birth position. And often I find myself saying to people, well, a good relationship, a good friendship, a good career has to be in existence for 7 years before you can really say, yes, this has substance.
Yeah, it settles then, doesn't it? If it got over the 7 years. I've met a lot of people who've been in a job or a relationship for 14 years.
Yeah.
Double one, and then it ends. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. 7, 14, sometimes 21, 29.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't
It does change. Yeah. And the 7-year itch is a well-known phenomena in history.
Yeah.
So, and I do believe it's down to the transits of Saturn that that phenomena comes.
Yeah, it's interesting because it brings things to an end. It's a lesson, it's a learning, it's what do you most need to learn in life right now. It can be very uncomfortable, but also if you take advantage of it, really helps you grow and mature. So let's
and bring in good structures and boundaries.
Yeah, structures and boundaries. And we all need to learn boundaries, don't we, in this world? How to say no, that it doesn't work for me. Lots of people are not good at that. So let's go to the transpersonal. So let's go to Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, and just explain what the transpersonal are, how they play out, because it's kind of generational stuff, isn't it, as well, and they play out personally in our chart.
The easiest way for me to do this in the limited time we've got is to give you the spiel that I give my clients when I'm talking about these energies by transit in their personal chart. And with Pluto, it can be, on the negative side, it can manifest as obsessive and compulsive behavior with periods of intensity and extremes, crises and trauma, and often very nefarious and underhand behavior, either from you or towards you. Whereas at the neutral level, it deals with purging, detoxing, cleansing, purifying, and eliminating. And on the positive side, transformation, regeneration, and rebirth, caterpillar to butterfly, snake shedding skin. Neptune deals with gullibility, escapism, avoidance, neuroses, addiction, deception, but also the artistic world, the imaginal, the creative, the dramatic,
the dreamer,
and also, of course, the spiritual one's relationship with the divine, however you choose to see the divine as being. Now, with Neptune and Pluto, you've got Neptune dealing with the subliminal, the neurotic, the imaginal, and the spiritual. Pluto dealing with the unconscious, the subconscious, and the psychological. Put those two influences together, you get the transpersonal. And when I say to people, okay, you've got no transits going on this year from Neptune or Pluto, therefore the transpersonal is working, and if it's working, don't fix it. No need for counseling or therapy. Uranus, I don't put in the same class as Neptune and Pluto, because Neptune and Pluto do work in a kind of semi or unconscious way. Uranus doesn't. Uranus can be very much in your face. And if it's not going to be in your face, it'll sit there in the background, chipping away, going, you need to make changes. You need to make changes. If you don't make changes, I'm going to hammer you. You need to make changes.
Or I'm going to bring them to you. I'll manifest them for you if you don't do it yourself.
Yes. 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 And Uranus is a lot more. I mean, I've actually been in the Sahara Desert and seen a very faint electrical blue glow where Uranus is. And it's just on the very periphery of vision. But that's so representative of Uranus's influence. It's almost conscious.
Yes, isn't that? Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
So just to talk about a little bit about the generational themes that they also bring into our lives.
With Uranus and Neptune, the dynamic dynamic between them, because Neptune is twice as far away from the sun as Uranus is. Neptune takes twice as long to go around the sky as Uranus does, 98%, 99%. So the sacred geometry here is amazing. If you draw a circle of Uranus's orbit, put a square around that circle, and then put a circle around that square, touching the 4 points of the square, you've got the orbits of Uranus and Neptune accurate to 99.8%.
Incredible, isn't it?
Oh, there's so many examples of stuff like this.
Yeah.
So many. So yes, Uranus will take 7 years to go for a sign, and Neptune 14. Pluto, because it has a different plane of orbit and its orbit is elliptical, can pass through a sign in 11 years with Scorpio and Sagittarius, or 30 years with Taurus. So Pluto's a wild card. And I know Pluto's smaller than our moon. I know it's 4 billion miles away. And I really resonate and I really understand those people who say that, well, it can't affect us, it's too small. But the stats prove them wrong.
It does every time.
Oh.
It's extraordinary when Pluto's doing its thing. And look at what's happening right now with Pluto shifting into Aquarius. Oh my God, there are storms. It's literally
Everywhere. And you talk about we're talking about the radio waves that NASA's finding out there in the galaxies, the huge rings that they're finding now surrounding galaxies. And this points even more to what I was saying in previous discussions around the holographic and the sentient universe. You know, God does not play dice with the universe. There is order out there and there is meaning. It's just that our brains are probably a little bit small to grasp the vastness of it. At least we're down here in the bottom of this gravity well.
I've been looking into panpsychism recently, which is about the fact the universe is conscious. And we've always known this. And Rupert Sheldrake's been doing a huge amount of work on morphic resonance and all this stuff. Thank God for him, by the way, standing going, no, mate.
Yes,
no,
absolutely.
I'm right.
And his son, Merlin.
Yes, who's doing fabulous work with mushrooms. So, you know, I just think all of this is very, very exciting. And it actually, I think what's happening, I've got it at home. I've got it here too. It's just terrific. Anybody who hasn't read it or hasn't connected with Rupert Sheldrake's work and you're interested in astrology and astronomy, please connect with him and the work his son Merlin is doing. It's outstanding, and it's
vital.
Changing, and it brings consciousness into consciousness.
makes you aware that you know what you're thinking about.
Yes, absolutely. And just knowing this isn't just a weird coincidences, or, you know, it just is. We're living in a vibrant life energy vortex, radio waves, whatever you want to call it.
And it'd be easy to say, oh, we're so minute compared to all that. But then the microcosm is reflected in the macrocosm and vice versa.
Yeah. And you know what I love as well, and I know this is a bit dodgy for you, but we're talking about Brian Cox. He says to us that we're created with stardust. Well, according to panpsychism, and everything is conscious, therefore stardust is conscious, therefore
absolutely,
we are conscious, therefore the universe is conscious.
I was privileged to be at in the company or at a lecture by Terence McKenna, and I believe Rupert Sheldrake was in the audience when McKenna pointed out that the single best way of transferring intelligence between galaxies was by spores. Because spores can live in interstellar space without food, without oxygen, without air, without light, or without heat, until they find somewhere where they can suddenly expand.
Don't we live in a magic world?
Don't we live in a magic universe?
Only open up to it and go, wow, this is it. Steve, I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, me too.
We better draw this conversation to a close. So is there anything you'd like just to say, just to finish off?
Yeah. When you go out doors at night and you look up in the sky and it's a clear sky and you can see the planets, you can still see Jupiter so brightly, especially when the moon passes by, as it did a couple of nights ago. And pretty soon you can still see Venus in the morning. Saturn is fading, but Mars is going to slowly start getting brighter now in the morning sky. So when you actually get out there and look at the planets in the sky, and you can see them moving against the background of the stars behind them, the constellations, you can see the whole of the creation myth. And that story is constantly changing, and it's beaming its energy through some type of radio wave or magnetism onto the earth and onto us. The process of evolution is ongoing. The way we choose to react to it is negotiable, but change is happening.
Well, on that note, we'll say, well, thanks, Steve. I love this conversation. And thank you to all who are listening to us.
And we'll see you again in 2 or 3 weeks' time.
We will.